everybody. Welcome to the Flawed Theology Podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie, and we're asking the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Flawed Theology Podcast. We're excited to be back for another episode. And true to form, we've got another guest. So the thing that's funny about hosting a deconstruction podcast is like when you post it in a few places, you find out that, oh, this person is a deconstructing person too. So that's kind of who this guest is. This is an online friend of mine through what I like to affectionately call the cult of Echelon, which is an exercise bike company similar to Peloton, but cheaper and less pretentious. Right, Laura?
Yes.
So we met through Echelon, and Laura is a triathlete and she's a nurse. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from?
First off, hi. Nice to be on the podcast. General background stuff, faith journey wise. I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, pretty conservative area. My family was very Catholic, but not overly religious. When my grandparents came to town, we were super Catholic. When I was a kid, it was like, okay, we're going to go to church. But thankfully, my parents weren't overbearing about the whole religion thing. I did the baptism, went to Sunday school, did my first communion, did the whole vacation Bible school thing. Then as we got a little bit older, my parents were like, you know what, don't tell your grandparents, but we don't think we're Catholic anymore. We're going to go to this Presbyterian church where their friend was the minister. So we went there and they drugged me along. That's fine. Was a participant in high school in Young Life. I was an Advent member going every week. I went to the camps. I even worked for a summer at the camp as a work crew person, like all hyped up for Jesus for 3 months.
This is Young Life camp?
Yeah, Young Life camp.
Which one?
I was a camper at Saranac, and then I worked at Lake Champion, both up in New York.
Okay. My ex-wife was a big Young Lifer, and she worked at several camps down in the Carolinas. So I was just curious if a weird serendipity there.
Yeah. So then I went off to college, and I went to college in Providence, Rhode Island, and just stopped going to church. There wasn't one close by. I didn't really feel the pull to go there. To be quite honest, which we'll get to, I'm sure, a little bit later. I was always kind of like faking it till I made it, kind of hoping I'd make it at some point and start figuring out what everybody else was talking about. But then when I went to college, I'm like, hey, there's no one forcing me to go to this. I'm not going to go.
Right.
I moved to a ski resort in southern West Virginia and did their marketing for a little while after college. Moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then I knew nobody in Michigan. So my roommate got me to go to her Methodist church with her. So then I became a Methodist, even went through everything to become a member of that church, a confirmed member. I taught Sunday school to preschoolers. I learned you can teach any Bible story with Play-Doh and graham crackers.
Very true.
I did that for a while. I moved to Atlanta. Again, didn't know anybody. My HR person, oddly enough, invited me to her church, which was one of the Andy Stanley mega churches in the Atlanta area. And that was my first introduction to what I call slick Christianity. Mm-hmm. Like the welcome team, the coffee shop, the bookstore, the modern worship music, all of that. And I was involved in that for years. Got married into a Southern Baptist family, which I never was able to get on board with that. That every head bowed, every eyes closed, please raise your hand for the Lord. I could not.
That was pretty good.
Thank you. I can slip into the Southern accent when I need to.
Yeah.
Literally just kind of bounced around and around for a long time, but it never honestly fit. It just felt like I was like square peg, round hole. And I thought there was something like severely broken with me because I was like, everybody else looks so darn happy and so committed to this. What is wrong with me? And just like you said, you posted something and I kind of had I don't know why, because with the algorithm, I rarely see anything you post on your personal page, but this one popped up.
Yeah.
It was God. And it was talking about your podcast. And I was like, oh, and I remember I was walking on the Riverwalk in Chattanooga, listening to one of your guys' episodes. I'm like, holy shit, this is what I've been trying to figure out. This is a thing. And then I just went like into the rabbit hole. But I will say, being a non-believer in the Bible Belt, and that's not a comfortable place to be like, hey, I'm not sure if I believe this stuff or not.
Yeah.
But like, if I were to say now to everybody, hey guys, guess what? I don't really believe in God. They're like, well, of course you don't. You moved to Los Angeles. That place did it to you.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm waiting for that once more people kind of find out that, hey, maybe she's not one of us.
Yeah.
So going back to your college days, and I totally identify with what you're saying with trying to fake it until you make it. That's my story through and through. But when you were in college and you said you weren't going to a church, did you struggle with feelings of guilt about that? Because you had it, I don't know about you, but I had it instilled in me that, like, you got to go to church every week. And if you don't, you're doing something wrong. You're neglecting your duty. Did you feel guilt about that?
I felt a little bit of guilt at first because my mom's side of the family is extremely Catholic. And some of them have broken off from Catholicism, but religion is still like very important to all of them. So I kind of became what I would call a C&E Christian, Christmas and Easter. Like if I was around a church, I felt like I had to go, like I had to be there. I would get involved in a couple of the like Christian-based campus events just so I could feel like I still had a tie to it. Because you're right, to a point, you're like, this has always been part of your life. What are you doing, you heathen? This is what they warned you about. You go off into the big bad world, and then there goes God.
Right.
Look at you, you walking stereotype.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun in college just because I was 600 miles away from home and in a completely new area. And none of my friends were big churchgoers up there, so that made it a little bit easier. Like we weren't all. I had a whole group of people to hang out with on Sundays if I didn't feel like going to a church, so that made it a little easier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like you kind of described always feeling like the square peg in the round hole. Was that more of because you had questions about the Bible and the religion itself? Like did it not make sense to you logically? Like what were the things that made it feel like you didn't fit in, even I guess when you were active in it, you felt that way. So like what were some of the reasons you kind of felt like that?
Well, it was an interesting kind of paradox because on one hand, I would be like, I'm not sure I believe this. And then I would get like in Atlanta, especially, I'd go back to a service and I'd hear the music and I'd have this huge, just emotional feeling in my chest, just listening to the music. And I was like, oh, see, that's God right there. That's a sign that I'm supposed to be back here because this music is moving me. And then I started realizing I can have that reaction to a well-written song by anybody. It's methodical. It's formulaic. You know, the music is supposed to be making me feel like this. But it also just kind of stemmed from, I couldn't figure out how a God who loved us and created us in his image, how we were so imperfect if we were made in his image.
Yes.
And if we were made in his image, how could we be so unworthy? It almost, as I got older and I just started kind of thinking about it, I'm like, this is kind of like the Hunger Games or pick anything else. Like you're put in this competition and you've got to see if you're good enough to make it out the other side. I'm like, that's messed up. Like if God is an all loving, all supportive God, I don't see that. I see an insecure egomaniac who created a fan club who has to worship him and do everything he says we have to do to get access to this super special after club. And I'm not sure why God's ego is so frail that he needs constant worship from how many billion people are on the planet now at this point.
Yeah, like 7 billion people.
I couldn't figure that out. The other thing I couldn't figure out is why would God create people in a place that couldn't know him? And what I mean by that is, let's say a child was born to extremely Muslim parents or Hindu parents or parents who do not believe in Christianity or in a remote village somewhere where they're never going to hear about God. Why would God allow a child of his to be born into a situation that would condemn them to hell because they were born to the wrong parents, which he designed?
Right.
Like, I think free will was my biggest one, because that's just the ultimate circular reasoning. It's just God gave us free will. Okay, well, God either gave us free will or everything is part of God's plan and his timing. Those two things don't.
Yeah.
Well, you had the free will, but God knew it was going to happen. Well, then it's not free will.
Yeah.
Right.
Predetermined.
You've hit on a bunch of things that are like, regardless of like the arguments about, free will and determinism and neuroscience and all of that, like just from a common sense, logical standpoint, you said it perfectly. Like, how could you have free will, but then God has a plan? That's a perfectly succinct question that just kind of shoots the concept of free will right in the foot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, his ways are bigger than ours, or we can't know God's will. I'm like, I need an actual answer.
Yeah. And then the Bible says continually that to seek for God's will and that you can know it, but it seems like you never can.
One of my other funny things that never made sense to me is biologically, Adam had 3 sons, right? And everybody came from Adam. So there had to be I mean, come on, I'm from West Virginia. I know jokes about interfamilial relations, but
Right.
how I just like that didn't, and then all of a sudden other people appeared in the Bible, like, oh no, they married their wives. I'm like, where'd they come from?
Right.
Like,
How did it
were
all
they
start with
hiding
Adam and
behind
Eve?
a bush in a garden? Like, where?
Right.
These sorts of foundational things that don't make sense. When I was a kid, they really made an impression on me. And I remember exactly where I was this one time, and I was going over this in my head, and I couldn't make any sense of it. It was actually really scaring me how I couldn't make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was what you said earlier was, how did humans fail so quickly? Like, if we were made in God's image and we were supposedly perfect at the start, then why did we fail, like at the first test?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it would have been inevitable if it was that easy to fail. It would have happened one way or another. We didn't have a choice in the matter. We would have failed somewhere along the line, which means we were not made perfectly. And that plagued me so much. I think that was one of the first things that made me go, this isn't making sense to me. I don't really get it. And that's probably what kept me from being able to accept it.
Well, and like circling back, the first two humans failed. Like out the gate, we tripped. And if God is all knowing, God knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, why is he shocked?
Yeah. And why didn't you just start over? Like, if you're two people in and it fucks up, like, why not just like be like, you could just erase that.
Just like in The Good Place.
Yeah.
You press the button as many times as you need.
Yeah, you just get a restart, and like, no one would ever know because you're omnipotent and all powerful. You just restart the story and be like, hey, guys, don't fuck up this time. Yeah, let me help you out.
Yeah.
It's not a good look for God that he had the rug pulled out from under him with his first two people.
Right.
With your upbringing, did you feel like there was a level of indoctrination? We talk about indoctrination a lot, like, I mean, it's different kind of in Catholicism, I feel like, because there's a lot of people that are Catholic, like you said, in name only or on the weekends or when grandma comes to town. Did you feel like that you were kind of indoctrinated to believe the things and that's kind of why you did it?
Well, Catholics are good at guilt first. And it's also really hard, I will just say, for all the C&E Catholics out there, when you have to go up for communion, you got to remember which hand goes over first when you for communion. That's a whole different anxiety level.
Oh, wow.
But I will say it was never not an option that ever entered my mind growing up or how I was raised to not believe in God. That was the status quo of everybody around me. I was just back there this weekend. It is not a diverse population religiously or demographically. Everybody kind of believed the same thing. So honestly, like Vacation Bible School, everybody went to that. Everybody had a cross in their house, a Bible. You just believed in God. I don't know. I guess you would call it indoctrination, but I honestly had no other framework for which to put life into it because I didn't have another framework. It was everywhere. Yeah,
there's no exposure to really anything else.
Yeah.
And they tell you that anyone that believes anything, that they're just like wrong and going to hell or whatever, so then you just kind of isolate yourself from.
And that was actually so we had 3 elementary schools that funneled into my junior high school. One of them my mom taught at. And the one my mom taught at had a pretty decent percentage of Hare Krishnas. I don't know if you guys have seen I think it's a Netflix or Hulu special about the Krishna cult murders that happened. All of that took place 10 miles from where I grew up.
Oh, fun.
It's called the Palace of Gold, and there are a lot of Hare Krishnas there. My mom taught them, and I'm still friends with a number of them, and the ones I was friends with are some of the genuinely nicest, kindest people that, I've ever been around, and I enjoyed hanging out with them. But I remember asking once, they don't believe in God. Does that mean they're going to hell? And I could actually see my mom just kind of like, it was just a pause, hard stop moment. I'm like, I can't believe this family. Like, these are the nicest people. They've always treated me so well. There's nothing evil about them. Right. And that was probably a chip that came out of the wall pretty quick. I'm like,
yeah,
they don't believe, but they're nice.
Right. Like, they don't deserve hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then you start to question about God. Like, why would God take perfectly nice, good people and then just send them to hell? And you mentioned earlier the geographic aspect of like, you happen to be born in Wheeling, West Virginia, landed you in Christianity, but a kid who's born in New Delhi, India, how is that fair?
Yeah, and God placed them there.
Right. Yeah.
God placed them there.
Right.
Their birth was planned. Like their existence was planned. Why was it planned somewhere where they would not believe, like where they already start out of the gate at a disadvantage for Christianity?
Right. And if you really think about the broad picture of that, like why on earth would a religion that started in the Middle East all of a sudden magically have its actual like people who get it right in the United States, a place that didn't even exist, when the religion started? Like it doesn't even make sense. Like if you think about it from a historical standpoint.
That also, because like I remember somebody saying that white Jesus on the wall isn't what Jesus would have looked like, and that was just mind blown. I'm like, what do you mean Jesus isn't white?
Right.
8-year-old me didn't get that.
So, as your upbringing, would you say that you were like, I guess it sounds like you kind of ebbed and flows between your like involvement. Would you say that you were kind of fully invested in it until you got to college? Like it was your thing, like that's who you were?
In high school, I was definitely big into Young Life. And what I started, like, I was there 2 times a week. I was very active in promoting it. That was the biggest non-school related thing I was in. And as I started really kind of dissecting my involvement in it, when I started deconverting, I realized this beforehand, I never understood when people said, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I could not, for the life of me, figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
I realized I was there for the community.
Right.
But when people said, oh, you just have to have a personal relationship with Jesus, I was like, what does that look like?
Right.
Like with someone who doesn't talk back or that you can't see, that's called an imaginary friend. And children are usually discouraged from having those after a certain point.
Right. Well, and like Young Life is like sneaky evangelical because it's like, it's cool. Like you go to the gathering or they do on Friday night, whatever it was called. I can't remember what they called the Friday night thing. And, they're playing U2 and secular songs as worship songs. Yeah. Yeah. Like
always remember Brown Eyed Girl.
All the secular songs as worship songs. And then, they would kind of like backdoor the religion stuff in and they make it sound like cool and fun. And like you're saying, like Jesus is my boyfriend type thing. So you went to like all public schools growing up and like secular college and all that stuff. So you had kind of like a framework for education. And were you into like young earth creationism and all that stuff?
No.
Because Catholics don't really do the young earth thing, but
they do not do the young earth. Catholics pray to everybody and their mother for everything under the sun. There's a saint. I'm pretty sure there's like a saint for sliced bread if you like really dug into the canons of Catholicism.
Yeah.
I was not young earth creationism, but like I said before, you did not question if God exists. You did not question if Jesus was the only way. And in my world, you did not question if you if you did Hail Marys and you prayed to Mary and you went to confession every week. That's a whole different fun little thing where you go into like a phone booth and tell this dude between a partition everything you've done wrong that week. And he prescribes you a number of Hail Marys. And I just can't imagine the dirt from that community that's rolling around in that man's head.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you find out how much dirt they have of their own, because there seems to be quite a large problem with a lot of Catholic priests doing pretty dastardly things,
Yep.
When you were an adult post-college and were in Atlanta doing the Andy Stanley thing, how old are you? Like in your 20s at that point?
I was 23 when I moved to Atlanta.
And then you wound up getting married like while you were there?
So interesting thing about that, and probably one of the biggest points that didn't directly lead to my deconstruction, but got the wheels going, just really about what kind of God would let this happen. I moved to Atlanta when I was 23. When I was 24, I was home for a friend's wedding, and my mom retired at 3 p.m. on a Friday and died of a massive heart attack that night at 9 p.m.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And I just happened to be home. Wasn't a nurse. I actually had just gotten fired from my advertising job because I hated it. Everybody told me I'd be great at advertising, so I didn't think about what I wanted to do. I just did what everybody else said I should do, and kind of like following God. And I was about to go over to South Korea to teach English, because what else do you do when you're 24 and have no direction? And I came home to find my mom deceased. And I was really pissed off at God for probably 2 to 3 months. Like, how could someone who worked that hard not get to enjoy a damn minute of her retirement?
Mm-hmm.
I had no answer for that. And I kind of shut down. At first, I looked to religion for the answers, and then found they were just greatly lacking. I kind of forget what the original question was because my brain went somewhere else with what I was saying. But that was like a major turning point and that's why I got married. Is my husband, you could ask anybody, my ex-husband was not the right person for me, but I was like, okay, well, now you do what you have to do and become an adult in this world, and that means you get married, you grow up, you stop with the kid stuff, you have a parent who's died. It kind of kicks you into a different phase, and that's when I got introduced to Southern Baptist, which is a delightfully weird world all to its own. It's really fun to watch that play out on Fox News on a daily basis now.
Right. So that was kind of your first introduction to like real full-on evangelicalism, because like Andy Stanley is pretty like that's pretty evangelical, but again, it's also like it's sneaky too. Like
it's sneaky.
It's sneaky and it's like seeker friendly, like you said. It's all like, hey, we accept everybody. It doesn't matter like where you come from. We're gonna give you the feel good juice, with the music and the coffee shop, but then the sermons are always like kind of sneaky, like backhanded with the guilt and the shame and the you're broken without Jesus type thing. The Southern Baptists are not sneaky about it. They're they're just gonna come right out with it.
I was truly amazed. My ex-mother-in-law, who on her own is just a fine person. I have nothing against her, but it was so funny to listen to her, someone with a master's degree in education who taught school, say some of the things she would say at dinners and stuff. Like, I remember one time I was down there and my other family members were down there, and my ex-brother-in-law was saying to everybody, well, his daughter wanted a Doc McStuffins doll, the little vet on the cartoon show. She takes care of all of her stuffed animals. And she goes, well, I wasn't going to let her have that because I'm not letting her play with a black baby doll.
Oh.
And
damn.
I think my coffee cup paused like on its way to my mouth. I'm like, what?
Pardon now?
Oh, excuse me? I don't know how it happened, but that Christmas, a lot of Doc McStuffins stuff ended up under the tree. I don't
Nice.
quite know who was responsible for that. Might have been me.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Nice.
But the hypocrisy there really opened my eyes to, we're cool with you as long as you believe the Christianity that we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And my ex-mother-in-law had a huge problem with the fact that I was raised Catholic. Like, you don't really believe in God, you don't,
right.
You're a heathen, you're going to hell for being a Catholic. And it just strikes me how much division there is amongst, how am I supposed to believe it? You guys can't agree on who's right amongst yourselves from church to church. I don't get how you're supposed to attract somebody to believe when everybody's got their own version.
Yeah. Was there pressure even as an adult, like, hey, you need to become a real Christian? You're married to my son, blah, blah, blah.
We need you to come down to our church. You're not going to go to your church anymore. We need you to drive 45 minutes from Atlanta down to our church on Sundays. That's where being a nurse is extremely handy because you work weekends.
Right.
That was a great, and she goes, I'll never forget this. It's a sin to work on Sundays. I can't believe you have a job that would make you work on Sundays like that.
Right.
Like, well, hospitals don't close, A. B, she said this to me at a restaurant after a Sunday service.
Mm-hmm.
You know who was working?
Yeah.
The people at the restaurant.
Right.
Yeah.
It's okay for them to work, just not you.
I'm like, you have no problem getting your cornbread from Hazel over here, but I'm not allowed to work on the Lord's Day. I got it. Okay.
Gotcha. They don't even see the hypocrisy. Like, they just don't even, there's like no recognition that like what you're saying doesn't make any kind of logical sense. You're like,
no, logic is devoid, but it's just like, we were raised this way. This is what we believe. And it's almost like when you try to chip away at that flawed logic or lack of logic or circular reasoning, it's almost like you're speaking a different language to somebody. Like, they just can't process what you're saying.
I'm convinced that there's at least two types of people. There's the type of people who can believe things or can choose to believe things and convince themselves of things very easily. And in a previous episode, we've talked about the concept of a tulpa, where you can invent a personality in your head and it becomes very real to you. And I'm like, I really think that is what people's personal relationship with Jesus is. But then on the other side, there's people like it sounds like you, and I know I definitely was more of a critical thinker. Faith was not a concept to me. I could not do that. And no matter how hard I tried, I think, Phil, you had the faith component, but then like your critical thinking side really took over. I don't know what makes people one way or the other, if it's nature versus nurture, maybe both. I don't know. But I really think that's why a lot of us look around at other people in church and go, yeah, what am I missing here? I don't seem to feel this. I don't get this.
Well, I started kind of thinking about God exists out of fear and control. God was created as a way to control a group of people. You know, if you don't believe in this, if you don't fall in line with what we believe, then there is a terrible punishment, which doesn't fit the crime. You know, a 5-minute infraction in this life deserves an eternity in hell and a lake of fire. Like that, that's super disproportionate to me. Yeah. But also, people fear the unknown and the idea that this is all there is. There's no one looking out for you. The universe is chaotic and random is truly terrifying to people. So God is like a controlling safety blanket. Mm-hmm. Some people are just terrified to lose that, even when confronted with a mountain of questions that don't have an answer. They would rather hang on to that belief of, no, there's someone looking out for me. There's a greater purpose to this, as opposed to, nope, you got one life. Let's go do it. There's nothing after this. There's no tribunal court that you have to go sit in front of after this is over and explain yourself.
Yeah. Well, if you look back at all of history, because you made the point of like God's being created by, man for control and power. And if you look at the whole of human history, mankind has been creating gods since the beginning of mankind. Mm-hmm. All of mythology is just filled with this god and that god's created to do this, and you got to fear that god, or otherwise bad shit is going to happen. That's been happening for eons of time, thousands and thousands of years. And then now magically we're supposed to believe, okay, well, this one that somebody created, well, now that's the right one.
That you can't agree on.
Right.
That nobody can agree on.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing too. Like it's like 40,000 different denominations just within Christianity. And you're like, how could that be right? Like it doesn't even from a basic mathematical sense, like how could you have lucked out of 40,000 denominations? I landed in the right one.
Yeah.
So I think you said earlier that you don't believe in God. I think you made that statement, right?
I do not believe in God. I will not go as far as to say there's absolutely 100% nothing out there. I can't say with certainty that there's not. So I'm not going to say that there isn't, but I'm going to say that I don't believe in the God that was presented to me in Christianity is it. I don't think like any of the gods that we honestly have in the world religions is it.
Right.
Okay. Have you adopted a label like agnostic, atheist, or anything like that? Humanist?
I like humanist because I think humans can help out other humans, and we don't need a book or a code to tell us how to be decent people to other people. Like, in fact, a lot of people, I actually get a little chuckle when I post something and people are like, oh, God has blessed you, or, you're such a good person. Look at what God's doing in your life. And I'm like, nope, it's just me. Like, that no one told me that this would be a nice thing to do, or, there's not some magical user manual I need to check with to make sure I'm doing the right things. It's just, I would say humanist, agnostic, atheist, but it's really funny when you say the word atheist, how people just automatically expect you to bite the head off a bat.
Yeah.
You're sacrificing babies on the weekend.
I think that's what kept a lot of us from adopting that label or admitting it to ourselves that we didn't believe in God for a long time, because I know that was true with me.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, there's this whole thing of like when you're brought up in that religion, you're like, well, the idea of atheist is like the worst possible thing. And it gets conflated with all kinds of other things, which really have nothing to do with what atheism actually is. It's like simply just the lack of belief in gods. And I forget who the original person that said this was like, well, everyone is pretty much an atheist about every other god.
Yeah.
Full-fledged atheist just added one more. Like, if you're really like classify yourself an atheist, you just believe that there's no gods. And if you talk to a Christian, they're an atheist too. They're just an atheist about every other god except one.
Yeah.
It makes more sense, again, like from a mathematical standpoint, the likelihood of you having the right one, it seems pretty slim.
Mm-hmm. it's just the goalposts always move, like with the end time predictions and, oh, he's coming back for sure this time. And okay, I'm going to go about my day and not have to worry that this comet coming through or this earthquake means that the world is ending. I'm going to take it to mean the tectonic plate shifted.
Yeah.
Or a piece of debris moved through the sky.
Yeah. Or an eclipse, Yes.
Yeah. Oh God, the eclipse.
That happens every whatever, and it can be predicted by science.
Yeah. We know when the next eclipse is coming. We know the path of totality. Now we know when it is going to happen.
Yeah. We talked about this like right after the eclipse, like that NASA has all the eclipses mapped out until the year 3000.
Well, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, every single one of those is a time when God's going to get really mad at us. We already know when he's going to be mad at us.
Oh, God. Okay. As someone who lived in Georgia for 12 years, I'm sorry for Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh, she's the worst. She needs to be voted out.
I don't even know how she's a functional adult.
She acts like a sixth grader.
Right.
No, not even.
She's an insult to sixth graders, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm super sorry about that one. I don't know how that one happened.
I don't think you have to claim it just because
you don't have to apologize.
Just because you live there. Yeah. So would you say, in your journey, was there a specific time or some kind of event that you just kind of came to the conclusion that you didn't believe anymore or you weren't a Christian? Was there something specific that happened?
It wasn't like a lightning rod moment. It was literally this slow, awkward little descent into, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, why would that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm sitting there very quietly these are things we don't use with the outside voice because these are going to get some stares if you start asking these questions. And like I said, I found your podcast and then I just went into from there, the thinking atheist, divorcing religion. You can't get to heaven in a mini skirt. I started just consuming this topic and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
There are other people who don't believe, and it's okay not to believe. It was actually really scary because even though I wasn't a hardline fundamentalist, realizing that something you believe for about 36 years of your existence isn't real is scary.
Yeah.
Just trying to recreate that worldview. But the funniest thing is, since I just kind of sat back and I remember there was one day I went back, okay, so I'm an atheist. Just okay, it's sunny out.
You look up for the lightning, you're like...
Yeah, I mean, that would be when the freak lightning came down and took me out. And my life has been less stressful since I have come to realize that I do not believe in an omnipotent poor micromanager who is watching every single thing I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you went through a divorce too, and that usually leads to some measure of lostness. You feel well, what the fuck happened? Was that part of the journey at all, or you were already?
I was deconverting and didn't know it before that divorce. That divorce was years in the making, and honestly, the best thing I could have done for my mental health. But it did make it more awkward because as I was getting more and more resentful towards religion, I was still going to these Southern Baptist churches and still. I think there's one service I remember at the end, there was always an altar call. Come on up if you want to accept God, right? If you want to accept the Lord, raise your hand. And then everybody's got their eyes closed and you hear you come on up, you come on up. I'm sitting up there kind of sitting back and I pretended to have my eyes closed and they were slit open. Not a single damn person in that church had their hand up. And he was like, yeah, you come on up. You come right on up, brother. You come on up. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, none of this is real.
Yeah.
This is all a dog and pony show. Make sure you give 10% of your income to the church. Let's make sure you tithe. Let's make sure you take care of us. And when I got divorced, I was pretty well deconverted. But like I said, just unaware that that's what had been happening.
Yeah.
When I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, not long after my divorce, I don't think I have set foot in one church in Tennessee unless I was there for a funeral or a wedding. But kind of tying back into that Southern Baptist, that relationship, my ex-husband got very sick in January and my mother-in-law called me and she was telling me about my ex-husband and she was like, I just need you to pray. And then he got out of the hospital and she goes, see, I told you prayer works. He passed away 2 days later.
Oh Oh my God.
It was very complicated grief to deal with his passing because while I wasn't married to him, I didn't wish anything terrible on him.
Right.
But it was just interesting how she switched in that moment to, well, this was the Lord's will. I'm like, literally a week ago, you were telling me that prayer worked and God had healed your son.
Yeah.
Where did the goalpost move?
Yeah. What happened?
How did it move?
Yeah.
Kind of the same with prayer in general. Like whether it's answered, not answered, you got an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's literally no outcome that can't be
There's no outcome. No,
yeah.
It's just a giant circle. It just wasn't the Lord's time, or the Lord answered your prayer, or like I've heard you guys make the comment, well, God answered my prayer and gave me the parking lot at Target or the parking spot at Target. I'm like, really? Like that just irritates me just as much as it irritates you. I'm like, yes, Karen, God cares about your parking spot at Target on a Wednesday.
Yeah, but not the Palestinian genocide in Gaza. Like he's getting you parking spaces.
No.
He's getting you parking spaces, but millions of kids are being slaughtered.
There are like 3 humanitarian crises I can think of right now off the top of my head.
Right.
That an omnipotent God should be able just to stop. And one of them is directly over religion.
Right.
The biggest one in the news right now is over religion.
Yeah.
And I just don't get how there can be blinders on about how asinine it is to, still keep believing that God is going to come in. And because both sides are fighting for God, just different gods.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, you've mentioned kind of a lot of these things kind of indirectly, but what do you view as like some of the most damaging aspects of like religion or faith? Like, is there anything that stands out to you that like, yeah, because I go back and forth sometimes like, okay, well, should we just like let religious people or people who believe, like, should we just kind of leave them alone and leave them to their own devices? Or are they actually causing damage? And like, what's your thoughts on that? Are there things that are actually damaging in religion, or can people just believe what they want?
There absolutely are. I don't want to be the atheist agnostic version of an evangelical and shove my beliefs down other people's throats, like you shouldn't believe in this, because it's bad for you. Just like I don't love people telling me that I should be going to church and believing in God. But I really think, especially the Southern evangelical movement, like the kicker from Kansas City, like his speech.
Which is Catholic, ironically enough.
I know, ironically enough. Congratulations on getting this degree, but can't you just wait to get into the home and be a homemaker?
Just be barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah, I have 2 or 3 friends, brilliant people, who were married young because that's what the church said to do, got pregnant, left their careers behind. Well, then when they're 40, 45, the marriage crumbles. And now they're left with no financial outlets, no job skill set. They're stuck. Or the number of LGBTQ people who feel like they are less than because of church doctrine when there's nothing wrong with them. Kids who have to go through or went through conversion therapy for things like that. I think that is incredibly harmful. Mm-hmm. I think telling people what they can and cannot read is very Orwellian and a little terrifying, based on God wouldn't like this. God wouldn't like a lot of things you're saying, but no one's calling you out on it.
Right.
I do think it can be extremely damaging. Now, my dad, for example, he belongs to a church in Georgia. I honestly think he does believe, and he holds on to that hope that he's going to see my mom again. And I know taking that away from him would be incredibly damaging to him. But I know he's involved in the church just so he has something to do. He goes and he repaints the church and he fixes the fridge when it breaks. And it's more like, I think for some people, especially the older community, they use it as a sense of community and, to combat loneliness. But I also think it's very harmful to teach someone that you are inherently bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Who says that to it's not said directly like that, but when you're in preschool and like vacation Bible school when you're 4 or 5, it's like, without God, we're all sinners and we need God to go to heaven. It's just like, when you really sit back and think about that message, you're like, that's pretty messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you know Tim Mills? He does Harmonic Atheist on YouTube.
I heard the name.
Yeah, he has said multiple times that when he was a kid, they told him in Sunday school that even if he was the only person on earth and the only sinner, Jesus would have still died and suffered and died that terrible death just for him. And he would have had to do it because of him, because of how terrible he is. And I just thought, whoa, like that is like way too far with the manipulation.
Yeah, manipulation's a really great word. Ironically enough, I'm a nurse, and just going to work every day actually weakened my faith pretty hard too, because you see people in various states fighting terrible diseases, and the person with the rosary and the prayer circle and everything has the exact same outcome as the person in the room next to them who doesn't have that. And then it's like, we're like my ex-mother-in-law, we're going to pray real hard and prayer's going to work. But then when the patient dies, it's like, well, God called them home. I'm like, the mental gymnastic.
Right. Yeah. Like, why would he do that? Like, he's leaving behind a whole bunch of people. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like,
or kids. Like, my friend as an ER doc, she had an 8-week-old baby beaten to death, brought into her ER. I know everything's like there's a lesson or there's a reason for everything. If someone can come up with a really great reason why God would allow an 8-week-old baby to be beaten to death, like, what did he send that baby's soul out from heaven and go, hey, see you real soon? Right. We're going to see you in 2 months. Or like, good God, working the bedside for COVID. Yeah, that was just like, there's no one looking out for you. This is biologic. You can pray as hard as you want. I will always remember one lady, she was dying of COVID. The ship had sailed to kind of save her. She could still talk. She wasn't intubated yet. And she looked up at me, because this was when both Fox News and CNN were just like going hard at who's right. Vaccines, no vaccines. And she goes, I just wish I would have known that this wasn't religious or politically motivated. That's what she said that to me. She died 3 days later.
On her deathbed. Like,
yeah, like, I wish I would have gotten the vaccine so that maybe I would have had a shot to beat this. She told me my pastor told me not to get it.
Oh, my goodness.
And I have a doctor friend in Chattanooga. She was very involved in religion, but she said, I've watched the church kill too many of my patients by telling them misinformation about medical stuff in the last 3 years that I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. So it's like they need a lawsuit brought forward against those pastors, negligence or something.
Like, you don't need to seek medical care for this, or, like, I've had so many Jehovah's Witnesses. I can't get blood. I'm like, you do understand you will die, like, in the next 2 or 3 days if you don't get blood. And then when their family leaves them, like, please give me the blood. I don't want to die.
Yeah.
But don't tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that ties back into your how is religion destructive case.
It's
A.
like actually killing people. Like, I feel like there's almost like a level of human responsibility that, because of our upbringing, we don't want to like evangelize atheism or whatever, but there's real damage that's being done. I mean, we're talking about people actually dying because they believe in just shit that is wrong. Like, it's just, it's pure wrong. And I think back to the church things that I heard about, like, why you should witness, and well, you would do the same thing. It was like, if your friend was drowning and you were there to save them, wouldn't you do it? That's what we're doing. We're throwing out the lifesaver to the person who's drowning in the water. And that guilt and manipulation, like, it works, like, because you're like, I got to go out and tell people and save them because you really believe in that hell and the eternal separation from God. But on the flip side of the coin, which of course is fantasy, but on the flip side of the coin, you're actually saving real lives if you tell people, hey, there's medical care for your disease.
Condition.
Like, you can't, and it's not just COVID. Like, this has been around in a lot of Christian circles for like a long time with, a lot of different diseases. They're like, oh yeah, that's not real. Your current life, you have a special needs child, autism, right? And autism is like a disease that the church thinks is demon possession.
Oh, I love that.
And vaccines, they've been railing against vaccines, all these kind of things. Like, this is why this stuff is actually dangerous. And like, I think you have a responsibility. And maybe it doesn't mean like posting just on Facebook willy-nilly, but if there's targeted things where people post something that's actually damaging, I feel like we have a responsibility to point that out.
And I found if you go all keyboard warrior on someone, that rarely works. Because if someone went keyboard warrior on me with Christianity, I'm not going to respond well to that.
Right.
But if you can get somebody out of the group and talk to them one-on-one as a person, and if you can get them to have a conversation, you're going to be much more successful making your point heard as opposed to like trying to convert someone in a comment thread.
Right.
One of the funniest things to me is I've just kind of tried to live by example. And what I mean by that is I've probably been an honest to God atheist for like 5 years now, just didn't know it. And when I was in Tennessee, I taught at an extremely religious university. I did nursing clinicals for them, and I did the whole interview process. And I mean, this church is like so tightly aligned with religion. It's alarming. Like almost half of my clinical students who have now graduated are already married, and like they're 21 married. So it's really terrifying. But they had no clue that they hired an atheist to teach their clinicals. And they were really sad when I left. They're like, oh, you're one of the best instructors we have. And I'm like, if only you knew. Like,
Yeah.
It's like one of those things. Don't you wish you could just like drop it on them on their way out the door? Like, by the way, thanks for all the raving reviews. And by the way, there's no God. See you later.
yeah, exactly. I had to start. One of the things was you had to start clinical day with a prayer. I'm like, oh, okay. Thou shalt not kill. That's an applicable rule in nursing, regardless. You shouldn't be hurting people. But yeah, that always made me kind of giggle at that. But I mean, I worked with, especially in the South, everybody. I just felt like the biggest outsider. I was absolutely terrified to say, hey, I don't believe in this.
Well, and it's even more mind-boggling in the medical community because like nurses and like doctors and stuff, these people they're rooted in science. They know how things work. They know how the body works. And then like Susie had an experience with a phlebotomist. She was a really good phlebotomist, which is it's a pretty difficult skill
that's a skill.
Yeah. And so she's like a really good phlebotomist. And then, Susie complimented her on how good she was. And she just deflected it by saying, oh yeah, well, God's blessed me with this, blah, blah.
I said, you're really good at this. And she said, no, God is good at this. And I was like, wait, what?
Oh,
God is my phlebotomist today?
Yeah. There is a measure of comfort that you get from, but like you said, believing in the afterlife and, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I get that sort of thing, but like when you're actually damaging people, then it's like, okay, we got to draw the line.
One of the amusing things is I said, like, no one would be surprised if I moved out to California and then announced I was like an atheist, like out here. Of course you are. You moved to LA. But I have moved into one of the most Christian enclaves in LA. I live in Glendale. This place has more Armenians in it than the capital of Armenia. Armenia was one of the first nations to adopt Christianity. They believe Noah's Ark moored itself on a mountain in their country during the Great Flood. Wow. So my neighbor, when I moved in, she asked where me and my husband went to church. And I said, oh, we're not married because we weren't married yet. So that set off alarm bells. Yeah, right. And then so every other time I met her, she kept trying to convince me to come to her church. She's like, hey, what's your church home? I'm like, oh, we don't have one. Just end the conversation. We don't have one. Yep. And then all of a sudden, the little pamphlets started showing up on my doorstep, like those little ones, like they'd hand out at a bus stop or something with like Jesus and a lamb and like the sun. And I told one of my friends about that. She goes, you need to get a picture with Jet, your little black cat, and like cradle Jet, like Jesus is holding the lamb in that picture. Take a picture, print it out and say, we worship this in our household. And I was like, oh God, that'll go over like, a ton of bricks. But
So have you told any of your loved ones that you no longer believe in God?
My dad knows. I'm adopted. My biological mother knows. A couple aunts that I've conversed with knows. One of them told me flat out, she's like, I don't believe in God either. I'm like, really?
Wow.
And another one was kind of trending away from it. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't believed in a while either. I just didn't want to say anything, I didn't want to. And I find that's pretty common. Several of my friends at work know. I never really broadcasted my Christianity, so I don't really broadcast not believing.
Have they treated you any differently, the people who do know?
No. I do regret the way I told my dad. We were moving me from Chattanooga to LA, and something came up on the topic of, it wasn't directly religion, but it was like on some world crisis going on. And I just went off about it. The filter came off, and it wasn't directed at him. It was directed at the situation. But with what I was saying, it was very clearly obvious that I think I even said, Sky Daddy is not coming to save you. And he just kind of looked at me and I'm like,
oh shit.
Yeah, about that. But nobody's really treated me any different, thankfully. I've kind of hidden it from my hardline holy roller people because, I am afraid to lose those relationships. And to me, I'm acting no different than I've ever acted in my entire life. But I know if that A word comes out, the sad truth is I probably will lose that relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We did a whole like round table discussion, I think, in the end of season 1, maybe. We talked about like revealing your deconversion to your family and the whys and why nots and the hows. And I always find it very interesting that there's so much more thought and love and humanity that goes into the do I tell my friends and family about my lack of belief than the amount of thought and love and concern that goes into do Mr. Christian tell some non-believer about his belief. Like they just think, oh, I'm going to do it because God wants me to. And we're doing it like we're not doing it or doing it because we actually care about the person, which goes back to that whole thing of like being good without God. Like you can actually make decisions that are good for your fellow man without being mandated by a deity.
Or you're not trying to get hole punches on your heaven card. Like, I've got to do this. Good Without God was a book that I read. I read The God Delusion. I just kind of went in, but then I was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of going into an echo chamber here. Let me back out a little bit, because it's easy to get your views validated when you're only listening to things that are meant for that audience. But even like I've tried going back and just listening to religious themed podcasts, like not over the top Bible thumpers, but and I'm like, no, nope, can't. Like, and that's not to say it's not still ingrained somewhere in my brain, because if you played Lord, I Lift Your Name on High, You Are My All in All, you play any of those songs from Young Life days, I know every word. There are times they get stuck in my head and I'm like, why? Get out. Get out, please. But like, I tell people that, because I've heard a lot, oh, I just go and the music moves me. And I'm like, that's intentional.
Yep.
That is an earworm. That is supposed to get in there. That's the reason you got that song in your head. From the reason you got the song from the radio in your head is the same reason you feel that uplifting movement in church. The song builds to create that emotion.
Yeah. What are some ways that you have found, like I hesitate to use this word because it sounds too Christian-y, but like found life on the other side, like happiness, community? Like, has there been things that you found that you think you probably wouldn't have found if you had have stayed entrenched in religion? Like,
I've gotten more involved in like pride parades. I go and do, gone to a couple of the pride parades and offer just like free hugs. Like, I'm 40 now, so free mom hugs to the teenagers who have been like displaced. I found that I don't need a justification for what I'm doing, and that my good deeds and my good actions are because I want to do them, not because I'm feeling guilty because I need to answer to someone. My sense of community, it's been kind of fragmented since I moved out here to California, but I'm very lucky to have a very large friend circle that I can call on. I'm getting involved with something that I'm very passionate about out here, and that's mentoring foster kids who are aging out of the system and going, like, not adopted, but aging out of foster system, going into the real world. I just started working with a group out here in California that kind of pairs you with an aging out foster kid, so they have someone. And I've made it kind of my mission every day, as stupid as this sounds. Like, I just try to make someone smile at work, whether it's my patient or like hold the door for somebody, just little acts of kindness that I hope snowball and impact in a bigger way. But it's really freeing to not have a scorecard in place for how well am I doing this. I don't miss that. Well, should I be doing more? No, I'm doing enough. I'm being a good human.
I don't know if you ever saw The Good Place, but do you remember there was like a storyline in one of the seasons where they were trying to gain afterlife points, but then they realized none of the points were counting because all the things they were doing, they only did them in order to score the points.
Exactly.
You're getting the points because you're doing it just for the sake of making a difference. You're not expecting anything in return. And I think that's the most powerful thing.
Yeah. And if I do die and there is somebody standing there who looks at my life on its merits, I would sure to hell hope they're like, you did a lot of good things. You were a nice human. You tried to do right for other people. You weren't an asshole. Yeah, you can come in.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wait, did you believe in this one thing? Did you say this one prayer? Oh, no, you didn't. Sorry. All of that doesn't count.
Right.
Yeah. We were going through a box in the basement of some of my husband's memory stuff from when he was a kid, and he grew up Catholic, just like you. and he had a little rosary with a card, and I sent a picture of this to Phil, making fun of it. But this was so new to me. But the card explained exactly how to do, I guess, the Hail Mary stuff, where you put your finger on one bead and then you say a certain thing. And you put your finger on the next bead and you say something else. And I was like, this is ridiculous. It's like Harry Potter or something.
Yeah, except not as cool.
Yeah, you have to get the spell right.
Yeah. And if you don't get it right, it doesn't work. It's just like that priest who had to redo all of his marriages, or all of his marriages were invalidated because he got a word wrong or something.
Oh, I heard about that.
This doesn't make sense, that this would be the religion of an all-knowing God.
Yeah. It makes me think that God's like Hermione Granger, and she's like Leviosa, not Leviosa. Like,
yes,
you've got to get it just right. Otherwise, you're doing it wrong, and you're not gonna get the points. Like
when you were saying, like I said, I don't push it down people's throats, but if someone actually seems open to a conversation, I will engage it. Now, I can't quote the Bible inside and out. I can't fight their scripture verse with my scripture verse, because I've determined, like, it was like when I was writing papers in college, depending on what stance I wanted to take on an issue, I could find something to support it. The Bible is no different. You give me an issue, I can find something that supports it. But one of my favorite arguments I would make is, I had a friend big into mission work. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions because I want to better understand. I need you to bear with me. She's like, okay. Okay, so God created everybody in his image, right? Yes. Okay, so everybody on this earth came from God, right? We're going to agree on that. Yes. Okay. So what happens if God decides to put somebody in a village in Uganda and they don't get the chance to be exposed to him or hear his message? Is that person damned to hell just by virtue of being born somewhere that God put them? Which usually causes a pause. And then they go, well, no, we believe that if someone truly has not been exposed to the word of the Lord, then they get a pass to go to heaven because they had no opportunity to hear it. I'm like, oh, okay.
They can't be held accountable. Yeah.
You can't be held accountable. If you haven't heard it, you're good. She goes, yes. I'm like, okay, then why in the hell do you do mission trips to these areas to bring the word of the Lord to these people? Because you have taken away their free pass to heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
You have given them now the choice, and now they can go to hell because of your actions.
Yeah.
I'd really love to drop that on somebody, because I just would love to be on the receiving end to see how they would like mentally gymnastics out of that one.
You can see the hamster going so hard on the wheel. There is like smoke coming out. And it's just like, well, it's our job to spread the word. And I'm like, we have to spread God's word to the people that God created, because God created people who would never know his word. That still doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And I've never got a good answer. I've asked that to 4 or 5 people. And I'm always very cognizant of the situation when I ask it. Like, I'm not going to ask someone whose family member is actively dying in a hospital room that question. Like, I'm not going to. Yeah. That is not the time that we're going to try and challenge your faith belief system. I am not an asshole.
Yeah.
In fact, if a patient asks me to pray with them, I will. I've done it twice. Like, when they've genuinely asked me to, I'm like, oh, this is going to sting. But if they're dying, that is, to me, not the time for me to try to interject and be like, well, actually, I think this is a crock of shit. I actually will tell them, how about you lead it and I'll hold your hand?
Yeah.
Because when someone is in those last stages, that is not the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Do you have any kind of advice for people in general who might be questioning their beliefs? Because, I mean, like you found this podcast at a different time in your journey, and we have a lot of people that listen across the spectrum. What's some advice that you might have for people who might be questioning?
Don't be afraid to question. Due to the internet, there are so many more resources than there were 30 years ago. You can find a safe community to ask questions. I know for some people who are coming out of more fundamentalist backgrounds, this can be absolutely terrifying because they stand to lose everything. But I think if you're living an inauthentic life and you're living a life that you don't believe in, it brings harm to you.
Yes.
And even if it's not religious trauma, full-blown horrific trauma, if you're not living your life to the best of your ability, you're not living your life. And some people aren't going to be on board with you doing that because a lot of people don't like change. gets scared and threatened by change or new information. So I just would tell someone to ask the questions, be open, and just find somebody who can listen without judging.
It's good stuff. Good stuff. Any particular resources that you have found to be helpful? You mentioned several things kind of already. So
I went through several podcasts, your podcast, the You Can't Get to Heaven in a Miniskirt podcast, the Deconversion podcast, Divorcing Religion, one called Indoctrination. I feel like The Thinking Atheist. I've read a number of books like The God Delusion, Good Without God, and just kind of went on to find some like websites and resources. If I just put in like deconversion resources.
Yeah, there's no shortage of them out there.
There aren't. And I honestly think a lot more people are quietly doing this than would publicly admit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the average person would be stunned if they said, I really don't think I'm all in on this Christianity thing. I think they'd find way more support than they would ever think they would. Because like you said, most of us aren't out there wearing a shirt that says free atheist hugs or whatever. Like, we're not out there advertising ourselves. But I found those resources to be very helpful just because there was also one Bible. I don't know if it's still in print. It's a Bible. It has the skeptic's rebuttal to almost every line in the Bible.
Is it this one?
The one you have sitting right there? Yeah, that's exactly it.
This thing's awesome.
Fantastic. It's just really good for people who are going to throw scripture in your face and try to attack you on that front. It's just good to be like, well, but this.
Yeah.
They're usually not prepared for a rebuttal.
Cool. Well, we want to be mindful of your time, even though it's 3 hours earlier. You got your whole night ahead of you, so that's good. But we really appreciate you being on here, and we will keep you posted when it's going to air. And it was really good to like hear your story. It was really nice to actually talk to you in person instead of just on chat, because I still find it like hilarious when people message me out of nowhere and be like, "Oh, I found your podcast," because always at first I'm like, "Oh shit." There's still that like low grade fear of like, oh, who did I piss off? So, and I guess, hey, we can claim you as like an official Flawed Theology podcast deconvert.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Well, we'll keep you posted when this goes live, and you can share it wherever you feel like. And
yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
thanks for listening to this episode of the Flawed Theology Podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie. Tune in next time where we will continue to tackle the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Be sure to join us on our Facebook group, Dangerous Questions, and follow us at flawedtheologypodcast.com. Subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Rate and review the podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple. Those reviews are really cool, and we like to hear from them. So until next time, keep asking the dangerous questions.
See you next time.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Laura. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
All right, have a good one. The hang up hand.
Which didn't work. Jesus, I'm still here.
She's still there. She's still there.
Fuck. I've resurrected.
I don't think I can even kick you out.
Oh, this is so funny.
Oh, no, she's still there.
Why am I still here?
She's persistent little bugger, isn't she?
That's so funny.
What the hell?